Hey guys, how are you? This is Javi with Javi Realty. Today we have a special guest, and I think that you guys are going to love what she's got to say. Her name is Liz Barletta. Liz, you can take the floor.
Hi, Javi. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Hi, everyone. I am Liz Barletta with the Barletta team at Ligris, and I am a real estate conveyancing attorney.
Perfect. Awesome. So guys, I compiled a list of questions with Liz that people usually ask. So if you guys have more questions, obviously, I'm going to link all her info and her details below. You can reach out to her directly. We're going to do the main ones right here, and then we can ask more later. But first question is, people really ask, what's the difference between an attorney? So the bank attorney and the buyer attorney, what is the difference there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for the most part, for you all who are home buyers, the likelihood is many home buyers, especially first-time home buyers, are buying and using a mortgage. So obtaining a mortgage in order to actually finance that purchase. So in Massachusetts, there's the potential on the buying side to have up to 2 attorneys. There'll be the buyer attorney, so the person who is the buyer's representative or fiduciary, and there'll be the bank attorney, and that's the attorney who's working on all the title aspects and closing the loan for the bank. So just to kind of explain it a little bit more, the one thing I would always caution your viewers is if you are closing and getting a mortgage and your lender says, this is the attorney for the bank, make sure that you are actually also going to be represented by that attorney or hire your own separate attorney. You should be receiving something called an engagement letter. And that is actually a document that explains what that attorney is going to be doing for you, that they're actually going to be negotiating one of the documents within the transaction called the purchase and sale agreement on your behalf. Because without an engagement letter, that attorney that you're being introduced to potentially could only be working for the bank and not you. So you need to be very clear that the person who is working on behalf of the bank is either also representing you, and it's very clear in an engagement letter, or you're hiring another attorney to represent your interests in the transaction. So on the buying attorney, what they're generally doing is negotiating the purchase and sale agreement. So that's the document that gets signed after the offer. So once the seller's accepted your offer, the next legal document is the purchase and sale. So as opposed to a 2 or 3 page fill in the blank form that the offer is, the purchase and sale agreement could be like 15, 20, depending on how size this font is, right? Obviously, it can get super long and lengthy, and every word can be negotiated. So it's super important to have an attorney on your side because the seller's attorney is preparing that document, and of course, it's going to be skewed in their favor. So it's super important to have an attorney represent you. So sometimes if you don't have that bank attorney, an informal engagement with you, maybe they'll take a look at the purchase and sale agreement, make sure they're matching up names and the price and dates, but they're not necessarily negotiating that on your behalf. So you really need to make sure that you have a separate attorney to assist you, or it could be the same, but again, that you have had that conversation with that attorney and that you're formally engaging them to help you as well. The buyer's attorney is also going to be tracking your mortgage commitment deadline. So that's the date that your lender has to say, you're good to go, you're approved, here's your letter of commitment. And that attorney should be looking at that letter and actually reading the conditions on the letter to make sure they can be accomplished by closing. So let's say there's a condition that says like, we still need your tax returns. But if that attorney doesn't potentially extend that deadline until that tax return document is back, what happens if the IRS goes on strike, which has happened in a transaction of mine? The IRS went on strike, and thankfully we extended the commitment because without that document, we couldn't close. So you have to have an attorney assist in these aspects to make sure you're protected through the transaction.
Wow.
Go ahead.
So question, so potentially, like, let's say the deal fell apart and you pass that contingency, what happens to the deposit for the client?
The deposit could be at risk. So it's not an automatic thing where the seller just gets your money. You still have to sign a release form to the listing agent. But at the same time, they could take you to court if you don't sign. If in fact that date passes, you can't close because of something, yeah, you could be at risk of your deposit. So it's a super crucial deadline and super important to have the right professionals involved to make sure that you're protected. And on the bank side, so what we do for the bank is essentially research the title and certify to them, to the lender, that you are buying clear marketable title. So we're doing a 50-year research of the title, making sure everything looks good, and then we're acting as basically like the escrow agent at closing, where all the money on the closing day flows through our account. So usually the first offer and purchase and sale agreement checks are paid to the listing agent to hold. Well, at closing, all the funds get paid to the closing attorney the day of closing, because we're in control of how the money gets split up. So we're going to pay off the seller's mortgage. We're going to pay the realtors. We're going to pay the taxes that are outstanding. So that way the bank and you as a buyer are assured that if the seller has any outstanding obligations, they're going to be taken care of before they get their money.
Wow. Okay. So that's a lot of stuff bundled
Yes.
in. That is
A lot of behind the scenes work.
Okay. Now I guess I'll jump to my next question,
Sure.
which a lot of people are asking is, do I actually need an attorney to buy or sell property? Like, do I need one?
Yeah. So at a minimum, on the bank side, you need an attorney in Massachusetts is required, because the closing itself and certifying titles is deemed to be the practice of law in Massachusetts. So in other states, so if you have viewers who are coming from out of state, we have a title company in Florida, for example, and in Florida, you don't need an attorney. You have a title company, and that's so we service clients that are, moving out of Mass to Florida. We're assisting them not as attorneys, but as a title company. But in Massachusetts, you need to have an attorney as part of the closing process. Now, you don't necessarily need to have an attorney in the purchase and sale agreement, the tracking of your mortgage. So on your buyer side relationship, you don't technically need one there. But at the same time, as I explained, there's so many important factors as to why it's necessary. In my opinion, as a risk-averse person, I'd like to have and think that it's important, especially in such an expensive and important transaction in a person's life.
No, I agree completely. I mean, you don't want to have all these variables up in the air. You want to have the least amount of risk involved, especially
Absolutely.
when someone's investing into a thing like a house or a
Yeah.
multifamily or whatever it may be.
And typically, I think what people shy away from is cost, right? So I feel like cost is generally the big issue, and people think that, oh, I hired a litigator and I got charged all this money, or I had to go through some kind of lawsuit and I was charged by the hour. Well, the majority, not all, but the majority of closing attorneys in Massachusetts generally will work on a flat fee basis. So you know at the get-go what you're going to be paying, and it's pretty reasonably priced. It's not like you're going to get a bill. I mean, again, some attorneys do it their way and they still charge hourly. Our firm doesn't, and the majority of those who just do real estate, for the most part, don't charge on an hourly basis. So you'll know from the get-go what you're paying, and it won't change at the end.
So essentially, you're going to make a little small investment, but you're going to have a bunch of peace of mind. I think that's a good trade.
100%. 100%. Yeah.
I guess this is great to segue into the next question that I have is, what is title insurance? Do we need title insurance?
So great. So title insurance, as buyers who are kind of shopping their mortgage, they're going to start seeing costs. And one of those large costs is title insurance. And there's two kinds. There's, especially if you're getting a mortgage. If you're not, it's only owners. But if you're getting a mortgage, there's two types of title insurance: owner's title and lender's title. The lender's title policy is for the bank's protection only. You get no benefit as a homeowner from that, but you still pay for it in your closing costs. So it's a buyer obligation to pay, but you don't get protection. It's only protecting the lender. The other policy is for the owner, the homeowner's title policy, and that is what protects you as a homeowner. And the great thing about it is, yes, again, it's an investment. It is costly, not crazy costly in the grand scheme of things, but it definitely has its cost. But it's a one-time fee, the owner's policy. So if you buy the house today and you're in it for 30 years, and there's a title issue that comes up that would be covered, that policy that you paid at closing 30 years before is still going to cover your issue. Which is nice. So it's not like a homeowner's insurance that's insuring the physical dwelling. That's annual. Title insurance, which protects the title of the property, as you pay it once and it protects you. Just to give an example of how it's helpful, I think like a real world example helps.
Yeah.
So we had a client who was selling her Somerville home. She had bought it again 30 years ago. That's why I say 30 years before. She didn't buy title insurance, and she was going to sell her home and move to Florida. She, again, Somerville was hot, went under agreement fast, cash buyer, all beautiful things. So she went under agreement to her Florida home, cash buyer, no contingencies, etc. We find out from the buyer's attorney that she had a big title issue. So there was family in the previous deeds that were transferring deeds back and forth to one another.
Oh,
okay.
Lord.
And unfortunately, the attorney that she hired back 30 years ago didn't notice that the most recent deed only transferred half of the interest of the home.
Oh,
So she,
no.
for 30 years, only owned 50% of this property. Okay.
Oh, man.
So thankfully, it took a long time. I became a detective. Like, I had to find these people. Thankfully, they had a very unique last name, and there was family from all over. There were people in Connecticut. There was somebody in Mass still, one person in California. They were all siblings because the father had died. And so we had to get a deed signed by all these siblings to transfer the title back to her. She lost her deposit in Florida because she couldn't close on time. Time, stress, all the things. Title insurance would have protected her in that case and gone to court for her if necessary, or all the costs related to fixing this issue. Thankfully, the silver lining is that those siblings didn't ask for money, which was like what we were expecting, right?
Yeah.
That somebody's going to say, hey, like, this is like my golden ticket. You want to sell? Pay me, you know? So thankfully that didn't happen. So it was less costly and worrisome than it could have been. But at the same time, title insurance would have, gone to bat for her. If she had to go to court for it, they would have protected her interests and rights and cured the title. So totally important, in my opinion. I think that, again, I have insurance for everything just because I'm a risk-averse person as an attorney, but I think for the investment, one-time fee, it's worth it, in my opinion.
In my opinion, it sounds like it is too. Especially with that story you just told me.
For sure. And one of the pushbacks I get, Javi, is like, so people say, well, you're an attorney, you're researching the title. Like, if you don't do it right, like, that's malpractice. And that's true. So if I miss something, that is malpractice, sue me. But this is not necessarily what it's covering. This is covering also undiscoverable issues. So if there's misindexing at the registry of deeds, so maybe there was a mortgage that was on the property, but it was not properly indexed.
Okay.
Things like that. So there's a whole list of stuff. If any viewers are interested to see what's covered on the policies, please send me a message. But the policy will cover a lot. So it's not just covering our issues, because that I understand to feel not right. Like, okay, I'm going to pay for insurance to cover what you could have figured out. Like, that's what I hired you for, but it's not for that. It's for the undiscoverable things.
Okay, awesome. So that clarified a lot of things even for me. So that's awesome.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm so glad.
So I guess I'll leave you guys with one last question, and leave you with one last question. Is I get asked a lot about homesteads.
Yeah.
And what they are they needed? What is your recommendation as an attorney for a homestead?
So if you are buying your home as your primary residence, and that's what the homestead is reserved for homeowners that are occupying as a primary. So if you're an investor, you can't have a homestead. But essentially what the homestead will do is protect the interest in your home against predators. So for example, if you own a home and you're occupying as your primary, the state of Massachusetts wants to ensure that your abode, where you're actually laying your head down on your pillow every night, is protected against predators. So it could be a creditor from a credit card company to like a lawsuit for something that I don't wish on anybody, any kind of lawsuit. If someone can attack your property, the homestead will prevent that person from being able to force the sale of your house to pay off that debt. Okay, that doesn't mean that they don't still have a valid claim against you. So hopefully one day they'll still, their hope is if they file a lien on your primary residence, that one day when you sell or refinance, you're going to pay them. But it just doesn't allow them to force the sale of the house to pay the debt. So for us, as a matter of course, we always include a homestead for our buyers, because we just know how it's our buyers that are occupying as primary. We just know how important it is. When we do refinances for buyers that didn't work with us previously, sometimes we'll get referrals from lenders with a new borrower. We'll always check title to see if that property has a homestead or not, because it's amazing to me how many law firms just don't talk about it to their clients when they're buying, and they just assume that the consumer is going to say, hey, I want a homestead, and then include it. No, you have to educate the consumer, right? So as a matter of course, we always include it when we know that they're occupying, because again, it's just such an incredible protection, and it's only $35 to record at the Registry of Deeds. So it's just a no-brainer to me.
Yeah, I mean, by the sounds of it,
yeah,
in a perfect world, you don't really need anything, but
exactly
in a perfect world, and you want to be protected. So this thing about the homestead, the title insurance, having an attorney, these are things that you don't really need, but you really want, and you really do need, essentially, at the end of the day. Am I correct?
Yeah, for sure. It's what's the cost of being able to go to sleep at night without incredible worry, and just being protected. Again, it's such an important investment. There's so many things for all these home buyers who are, working so hard to get to this point, like, achieving the American dream, and then to have it taken away for something that could have been resolved either through having the right counsel or having the right document recorded or paid for the right policy.
Okay. So if you had one last thing you wanted to say to the viewers here, what would you like to leave everybody with?
I would just want to say that attorneys are not scary. I think a lot of people, they have this impression of attorneys that they're not communicative, or they don't understand where I'm coming from, and that's not the case. I mean, some of them very much are. I know I work with them all day long on the other side of transactions. I know the stereotypical attorneys out there, but try and find professionals in your journey that just resonate with you and how you communicate and are available to you and sort of your learning style. Because although, yes, this is a transaction to acquire a home, it's also a learning process. So you want to make sure you have people in your corner like Javi, and hopefully myself, to kind of walk you through that journey and make sure you feel empowered with knowledge.
Awesome. And with that, guys, thank you so much for tuning in today. My name is Javi Hurtado Realty. Well, my name is Javi Hurtado with Javi Hurtado Realty, and this is Liz Barletta, and we thank you.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Bye.